and I suppose we're trying to demystify some of the spookiness associated with this book of Revelation. And part one last week, or last time we met, was really around just showing people that this is the revelation of Jesus Christ. This whole book is about Jesus Christ. Hence, it's just such an amazing book. And we talked about last time that John is the writer of this, and we get this beautiful insight into the visions that he has. So I suppose maybe my first question, it's assumed, it's thought that the John that we're talking about is the Apostle John, the John that was one of the 12 disciples of Jesus. Is that the case?
Yes, and that's the general consensus. I mean, he doesn't take any time to introduce what John he is. He just says, I, John, on the Isle of Patmos, assuming that people will know who he is.
Yep.
And whenever he speaks of himself, he just says, I.
Yeah.
He doesn't say, I'm John, who's different from the Apostle John, you don't know me. But if it is somewhere between 75 and 95 AD, on the Isle of Patmos, for preaching the gospel, the persecution of the Christ followers is happening.
Yeah. And maybe I want to ask you a question around then the trustworthiness of John. Now, last time we spoke, we touched briefly, I guess, on the difference between taking things literally and figuratively. How can we trust what John is actually saying here in this book, in this letter?
Well, if it's the same John that wrote the Gospels and the 3 letters, styles similar, then if we can't trust the revelation, the question needs to be asked, can we trust the letters and the Gospel? Now, we don't question the Gospel. We say that we've got the synoptics, Matthew, Mark and Luke, and then we've got John. We trust his letters, as with 1 and 2 Peter and James. So even here, he points out in Revelation 1:9, I, John, your brother and fellow partner in the tribulation. He's going through it himself, and his perspective is the kingdom, which Jesus has brought about. And there's a real island called Patmos, and it was a real island that was a prison island, pretty rocky, not much air. They've even set up a little grotto church there that you can go to, which I intend to go to one time. Then he finishes off the letter and says, I, John, I am the one who heard and who have seen these things. And when I heard, I fell down and worshipped at the feet of Jesus, just like he said in chapter 1. Now, either he's making all this up, or we need to take him at face value, that it is credible.
Yeah.
Because he's not just saying, I saw this, but I'm actually speaking on behalf of Jesus.
Yeah. And again, this is a book in the Bible. It's the inspired word of God. Yes. And we touched on that, last time. So again, this book needs to be read like any other book that we would read in the Bible. Now, maybe just on that point, in terms of helping us to read this book, read all 22 chapters, it's almost like there's 4 or maybe 5 parts, if you were. Now, whether they are 4 parts of one vision, or whether John had 4 separate visions. Maybe we can just have a quick conversation around breaking this book down into more bite-sized pieces. And we've just written down some notes here before we went online. And, really there's an introduction.
That's your first 9 verses.
Yeah, the first part of chapter 1. And then obviously the back half of chapter 1, we get into John's first vision, or first part of the vision there, and that's talking to the churches, Revelation 1 to 3. That's probably a nice chunk to begin with.
You'll notice after the 9 verses, then in 1:10, he says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. It's assumed if the Lord's day is a Sunday, or if he's still keeping a Sabbath, there was a day that he set aside as a prisoner, and he was in the Spirit on that day. The next time we see a phrase similar to that is in chapter 4. In verse 2, he says, I was in the Spirit and behold. So there's a break. So whether it's the same vision he's having in 2 parts, or it's a second vision, it then goes off in another direction, which tends to indicate It flows, break, new plot starting, flows, and it flows all the way from there to the chapter and finishes at the end of chapter 16.
Yeah.
And in chapter 17, we read again, so he, that's an angel, carried me away in the spirit into the desert. So we have a similar thing, and then the plot changes again.
Yeah.
And that goes all the way through to the end of chapter 20. The last section, 21 and 22, we see, and he, an angel, carried me away in the spirit and to a high mountain. So you've got this similar in the spirit concept, which I think there are other ways to break it up. This is not the only way, but this is one way that I think does justice to the whole letter. This is the man's visions that he's having.
Yeah, yeah, great. And maybe to make things easier, just to kind of reiterate some of those verses, we might try and put them down in the comments below. But maybe just very quickly, so we're talking about the introduction, the first half of Revelation chapter 1, then his first vision, Revelation 1 to 3, second vision 4 to 16, third vision 17 to 20, and then the last one being chapters 21 and 22, thereabouts.
Correct. Yep.
So yeah, that's great. That might be helpful for some people to read this book more in bite-sized pieces. Now, one thing I wanted to ask as well, because maybe it's hard for us sometimes to understand things that are otherworldly, things that are in the supernatural realm, and obviously this book is full of that. And I'd like to suggest that maybe when John wrote this, the Jews at the time had a better understanding of the supernatural realm than maybe we in our Western world do today. And again, this is not just in this book that we read about, angels and seraphim and cherubim and all these kind of divine beings, the divine council, if you will. But we definitely do come up against some of these terms and some of these creatures, obviously, in this book. So maybe for a couple of minutes, can we just talk about a few specifics and maybe demystify some of these as well? So let's just start with an obvious one, angels. Just give us we don't need a big theological expounding them, but just a quick little overview of when we read about, you just mentioned that in chapter 17, and it talks about an angel carried me away into the spirit of the wilderness. So what are we talking about, Michael? Give us some wisdom, mate.
Okay, so the basis of the word angel means messenger. And that's basically what it means. It's a messenger, angelos. But it would appear from the context that we're reading, it's not just a human messenger, because if we think of the first part of the books, each of the 7 churches had a messenger that brought a message, an angel of the Lord. The angel came. We see in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord. And there are these non-physical beings that appear to work to do God's will, bring God's message. Someone, if he is an angel, we've got Michael, the archangel, or arch being a high-level angel. Gabriel, who's always seen as a messenger to Daniel, a messenger to Mary to bring messages, a messenger to Zechariah, John the Baptizer's dad. So they seem to bring messages or direction. And the Jews believed in them. Yeah. We see through the Old Testament angels and into the New Testament. And here we have the 7 churches having a messenger. Yeah.
And look, we won't touch on, every spiritual being now, but maybe I can also, because we do hear again terms like Satan, demons. So we're kind of going the other end now to the angels. Just again, give us a quick overview when we read things like that, Satan, demons. What are we talking about here?
Okay, so the first one, Satan, in Hebrew, we've got the phrase, it's always in Greek and Hebrew, it's not just Satan, it's the Satan. And the word Satan means accuser. So it's the accuser. So I could literally, if I want to accuse you of something, I could call you the Satan. And that doesn't mean I have personified you as someone evil. I'm just saying you're an accuser. And that term has, over time, ended up being this personification of evil. Someone who's against God, someone who's anti-will of God and tries to damage what he has set up and his people. So that's how it all works.
Mm-hmm.
And then we meet this character more personified in the Gospels. Jesus says, for example, that the lake of fire wasn't created for humans, but it was created for that devil and his angels.
Yeah.
Or his fallen ones. So all of a sudden, Jesus says things like that. He says, I saw Satan fall as lightning.
Mm-hmm.
So he's taking this concept of someone who accuses to a personification. Along with that, we've got demon or daemon, which are those who are against God. We often can hear about good angels, bad angels. Well, they would be in what we might say the bad end. It's again personification of these beings who somehow fell from the first position that they had.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that relates to Lucifer's falling as the anointed cherub, the covering cherub around the throne, and if that's where it all happened, a third of them, some suggest, but they're not for the will of God. Therefore, disrupting the will of God would then falls into not holiness or goodness, but evil, hatred, hating God. Therefore, if we belong to God, hating us and any of his works.
Yeah. I think
That's
it's
very
probably
simple because there's a lot more in there.
Yeah. And look, I'm sure people will understand that we can't go into too much depth because we are running out of time for this little conversation. But I think one thing I just wanted to add on the back of that, we have to remember that when we're talking about demons, these are created spiritual beings.
Yep, they were created good and pure and wholesome.
Yeah. Until obviously they fell. Yeah.
One thing I will finish off by saying with Satan, he is a created being. He's not equal with God. There's a concept out there of dualism, that you've got two powerful opposing forces. Sometimes one wins, sometimes the other wins.
Yeah.
That's not Christianity.
No.
He's a created being. There is only one Almighty.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I think that's a strong way to finish. Once again, like we started, this whole book is about Jesus. He is alive. He is victorious. We live a life in him, and we live a victorious life in him. So I want to thank you again for your time, Michael. Maybe we can just whet people's appetite a little bit. And next time we meet, we're going to get into some great conversation around the Antichrist. Are we ready to do this next time?
Yes. So come in and we will discuss the Antichrist, and we might even talk about who he might be. Does he wear black and white? Does he wear red and black? Does he wear yellow and black?
You're teasing now. Yes, you're teasing.
We will talk about some of the theories that are out there and what the Bible actually says.
And again, in all seriousness, there are these theories out there, and we just want to demystify and just bring some life, bring some hope, bring some truth to what it's all about. So, church, we thank you for tuning in. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Can I say the book of Revelation is such a lovely book? It should bring hope, life, not fear. Yeah. It's such a great book. That's why we need to see Jesus.
Yeah, that's great. Well, on that note, we say goodbye for now, church, and look forward to seeing you once again really soon.